Welcome to the Visual Effects Notes podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by ftrack and Action VFX. ftrack is an Academy Award-winning company specialized in project management, production tracking, and the creation of media review platforms for the creative industry. ftrack has recently released 2 new versions of its media review software. Check out ftrack Review for the new interface and even more accessible reviews. You can also try cineSync 5, the brand new version of cineSync, built from the ground up for the most secure, high-quality review sessions out there. You can try both products for free via the link on the description below. This episode is also sponsored by Action VFX. Action VFX is the best place to get high-quality stock footage. I've used Action VFX in game cinematics, short films, trailers, and commercials. They are the best stock footage I've ever come across. You can also use the promo code Hugo's Desk for 10% off. Please visit actionvfx.com to learn more. And now on to the show.
Hi everyone, welcome to the VFX Notes podcast. I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters, and as always, I'm joined by Hugo Guerra from Hugo's Desk. Hi Hugo.
Hey Ian, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Here we are with part 3 of our Doctor Strange analysis of the visual effects. I really love this new format we're doing for the VFX Notes podcast by segmenting episodes. Are you enjoying that, Hugo, as well?
I am. I feel like, I am really enjoying it. People are enjoying it as well. I get some messages from our lovely viewers, and I think it's nice because it's a bit more, allows us to talk more in detail about certain parts, and also it becomes a bit more focused. And it's also easier to search, I guess, for people to search to watch just a few things. So it's great. I'm feeling good with that.
Yeah. Well, today we're going to be talking about the mirror dimension New York and the reverse Hong Kong sequences. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to make sure that we say thank you to our advertisers, our sponsors of the VFX Notes podcast. We love having them. And also thank you to the viewers, especially our Patreon supporters. And we do something special for the Patreon supporters, don't we, Hugo?
Yeah, we do. So again, of course, thank you so much for all this extra support. We couldn't have done the podcast without that support. And yeah, we always have the podcast available several days earlier for our Patreons, and which you can listen to while you're doing, maybe some gym, or maybe when you're watching something else or working, and you can listen to us banter about a film, and it's ad free as well. There's no ads, so which is cool. So thank you so much for the support.
Yeah, thank you. Right, Hugo. The big climax of the film, Mirror Dimension New York, Reverse Hong Kong. These are sequences taken on by Industrial Light and Magic, ILM. They're huge sequences. Let's start with New York. This is almost hard to explain, but basically there's a fight happening between Cecilius and Doctor Strange and other characters as the world of New York is bending, kaleidoscoping, fractalizing. It's pretty full on, isn't it?
It is. This is I think, well, obviously we all seen similar things when we saw Inception, because I'm trying to transport our viewers back to 2016 when this first happened. Obviously people already saw a little bit of it on Inception, but then this is full on crazy stuff going on. It's like Inception on mushrooms elevated by 10.
Yes. In fact, I remember that. The trailer had a bit of it and everyone went, oh, I've seen that already in Inception. But then when you watch it, I mean, ILM just nailed it with that Escher-like movement of buildings, but also it's actually not just buildings in the city, is it? It's actually cars going over humps, and they themselves are split and deformed, as are the people. I mean, I actually love that New York stuff so much. It was so brilliant at the cinema.
Yeah, it's just mind-blowing. I watched it also recently in 4K IMAX because Disney Plus just released the IMAX version of that thing, and that entire sequence is in IMAX. And yeah, you're right. When they bend, they have the slices, just like the time slice they have on Hong Kong as well. It is, and also you have this really cool zooms ins and zooms outs that kind of start with like a really close up lens, almost like a 100 mil, and then they zoom out, and it's almost like this kind of orthographic perspective, almost like a video game, almost like The Sims, and then it zooms in again.
Yeah.
I love those parts. I think this is just the nutty part, like of the film, and no, it's mind blowing. And I was pretty, when it first came out, I think it was probably one of the reasons why it was nominated for the Oscar, I think, at the time. I unfortunately didn't win, but, not everyone can win. But yeah, unbelievable work from, again, our friend Steph Soretti and his entire team at ILM. It was just, I loved it.
One of the things that really works with all the buildings and cars and structures moving around is it's not, because there's also a fight sequence, it's not just one type of thing. There's the warping, there's the bending, there's deformation, there's tessellation, there's Mandelbrotting, fractalization, there's kaleidoscoping, as I said. I actually thought that added a lot to the sequence because it's not like a one-trick pony. Yeah. And part of it is, of course, the magic that they're able to do to the world by being in the mirror dimension. I kind of thought that was a really smart move from the VizDev department at Marvel, but also obviously Steph Soretti, to do multiple kinds of things. And you're also never just in a wide view of the city seeing this happen. You're, right up close with Benedict as he's like going through a train. I think they call it the tube sock shot because it's actually like right with him as he goes through the center of this New York subway train. I think that to me was like the standout bit of the sequence, that it wasn't just one thing, it was multiple things.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you've talked about the tube sock now. So because one of the things that really made this sequence what it is the methodology that they went through even on shooting it, like the first off, of course, the previs that they did, but also the way that they've captured references. It was really interesting. I watched this. There's a really nice article on cineFX, and there's also like quite a few documentaries from the Visual Effects Society Awards as well. And it's really cool because they've basically plotted the whole city. They went with an helicopter and photographed the whole city, multiple plates, multiple things. And it's even really funny because one of the VFX artists apparently had some experience as a flight aviator in avionics. And so he actually made like these kind of interfaces for the helicopter
head-up displays,
driver.
Right?
It was just, it was so geeky. I can't imagine that is such a geeky move from an artist like to say, I do avionics.
No, but that was so that a navigator could be in the helicopter for aerial plates and reference plates and quickly look at where in New York City the pilot needed to go to get the proper view as like the whirlpool type effect happened and other sorts of things. That's really cool. And so the reference, the photography that they photographed for that was on an helicopter, like you just said, and then we had also reference material shot with an Alexa 65 and Red Dragons on the top of buildings. They had a lot of times they just went to the top of buildings, filmed from the World Trade Center, from other places as well. Well, the new one, of course, not the old one, but like a lot of reference photography there. And then on the middle of all of this, they've also filmed with this thing called the Strange Cam, which was really cool. This is like a rig, a 3D printed rig that they've made in-house, which is literally almost like a 360 sphere, really. These days, of course, remember this is 2016. These days we have like off-the-shelf cameras that do this. Like you can just buy an actual 360 camera, professional 360 one, or array camera setup.
Exactly, yeah. But at the time, it wasn't as easy, and so they made their own build, and this was really cool because then this allowed Soretti and also the team at ILM to visualize everything in VR. It was awesome. Like I found it fascinating because they could use it as reference. Like every time they needed to know how a specific street existed, they would put the VR headset, look around. Oh yeah, this street has this part. Oh, that street we can bend here. It was such a clever way of using all of this data that they've gathered from the reference material, from the photogrammetry, it was really cool. Obviously, now these days it's a bit more normal to have this, but 2016, so I thought it was really clever.
Yeah, well, interestingly, of course ILM has been involved in these huge films that take place in big cities, as have other studios like Framestore and whatnot. And I feel like there's a long history of ILM and other studios going into the city and getting photographic reference, as ground truth. That's where you get it from. As well, they had access to New York maps and spatial data and I assume LiDAR data of the city as well. I just felt that because of all that photographic capture and because much of the live action actors and extras were shot on green screen, the final sequence in New York has a very photographic feel rather than what might be described as a CG feel, which I don't mean in that way that people might think. but it just felt very natural. And it's a daytime sequence as well. Like it's not hidden in the dark or anything like that.
Yeah.
And all of that imagery brought together that way and then sort of being photographically augmented with effect simulations for the kaleidoscoping, tessellation, Mandelbrotting, deformation. There was something very realistic about the sequence that made it much more impactful from my point of view. Even though, of course, so much of it was virtual. So it's really successful that way.
It's fascinating. No disrespect to all departments. All departments did an amazing job, but I just want to give a shout out to the compositing department here because this thing is really complex, especially if you think about like when you start looking at the breakdowns and start looking at the way they shot this, shot on a complete green screen set, full green screen set with some props. There's some railings and there's some platforms and this and that. But this is insane. Every single shot has a mixture of several little shots that they shot with different people. Like, for example, this shot where Doctor Strange is running through the railings and there's 3 other people trying to chase him. These are all different plates, different shots, shot on different times that they actually had to glue together. And not only the complexity of that, but then top the complexity of merging different takes where you have, for example, on the tube sock shot, you have Doctor Strange being railed through the floor on a green screen. Then it cuts and merges perfectly to a digital version of him. And then it cuts again to a shot of him for real falling into the floor with wires. It's just a stitch up of different plates, ins and outs, going from digital to real to digital. There's people flying on wires. There are digital handovers, flawless digital handovers. Not to mention a full rotoscope of the entire body, and then in some places, full rotomation of the body to put the cape and the cloth and also like certain objects bouncing their bodies. This is a complex shot, and we're talking about dozens of shots. This is really big, this sequence. And shout out to the comp and the CG department because they did an astonishing job merging and stitching all these plates together and making it seamless from real to digital is not an easy feat. And I thought they did amazing. Like it's so good. It is a shame that some of these breakdowns are not on the wild here for people to appreciate. I wish there were more breakdowns like this because I saw so many of them when I was a judge at the Visual Effects Society back then, when I was judging on that year, and there's so many beautiful breakdowns of these shots. There's some which we will post here. Like this entire sequence is just amazing.
I'm going to add to that by saying I've also enjoyed, in subsequent films in which Doctor Strange appears, a nice evolution of what could be called the mirror dimension or now the multiverse, right? So in Spider-Man No Way Home, he of course battles Peter Parker within the mirror dimension.
Yeah.
And there's nice shades of going into, bendy buildings and a crazy canyon and a train in that sequence. And then in the film we've just seen, which is the follow-up to Doctor Strange, Doctor Strange 2, Multiverse of Madness, there's that incredible kind of falling, slow-mo, grappling scene, which is only like 20 or 30 seconds through the dimensions, which actually has a different look and feel deliberately, I think.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a nice evolution and of that sort of like leaping through dimensions and time. So I really like to. I really wouldn't mind looking at all three in a row and seeing how they appear, but I guess I can do that.
They do have a really nice feel, and also like I would add to that the sequence on the second Spider-Man against Mysterio, where he also goes through the mirror dimension a little bit. Sure. It's not exactly as big as this, but it also kind of has a really nice feeling. I love these sequences. I think the creativity on display. I know now we are a bit Mandelbrot out, I guess, where everyone is a bit Mandelbrot out. But at the time, this thing was unique, and this thing is special, you know. Even like these small little details when Mads Mikkelsen is jumping to a building and then the whole building kind of like just rotates. Those things are beautiful, and let's all not forget that is just, I'm not saying just, but that is just a green screen shot of him with a wire jumping. Everything else around him is CG. And it's so well integrated. Obviously, they had to replace parts of his body, of course, because he has to conform to the elasticity of that building. But yeah, that is, and also like the fight with the Sorcerer Supreme, that is a beautiful shot as well. Really loose camera at that sequence, and really handheld feeling to it as well. No, I love it. And as you said, daytime is not easy.
Yeah.
So easy. Shout out to the whole team, because they did an amazing job.
Yeah. The daytime thing is important to me in another way, because I feel like from around this era and just before, ILM was like the go-to place to do skyscraper buildings, right? Either ones that were crashing, like in a Transformers film, or in this film where you're up close on them and they're bendy. You know, that means they're also simulated. There was something about the requirements on ILM for a few years there where they were just like doing every single up close on a CG skyscraper in a film and doing it brilliantly, right? Like doing it so well. And I felt like here it was again, you know, showcased ILM's kind of superpower on these shots. So I enjoyed that.
We are, I know we're sounding like fanboys, but we are. Like they did an amazing job, like they did. Now, it is funny to see, now that we're now going into this, like for decades now, it is interesting to see certain specializations in certain aspects of these companies, of what they're really good at and what they've been specialized on, and the way that we see what VETA has been doing and what ILM has been doing and DNEG has been doing. It is funny because we had this on the beginning, where when the companies came in, the first VFX companies, they were certainly specialized in certain things. And now we then went through a phase where everyone did everything. And now we're going back again to a specialized thing, which is, it's really interesting.
We're going for a circle. For skyscrapers, for some reason, I mean, you know, and the challenges there are obvious. There's reflections, there's things inside, you know, and it's not just a matter of sort of photographing or rendering a building. There's so much more going on. Anyway, that's something I wanted to shout out on.
The most difficult part of all of that, especially when the Mandelbrot happens and the geometry starts kind of extranding and extracting, it's really the breakup of that geometry and the collisions of that geometry, because it really leads to a lot of render errors and a lot of problems and breakups, you know, because you're basically bending the rules of physics and you're actually having to extrude where it doesn't exist. It's almost like if an object, a box, is exactly as it is, the UVs of that object exist on a certain way, but then when you start stretching it, you need to like replicate UVs, and you need to like procedurally replicate it so it doesn't stretch the texturing and it doesn't lose resolution. it's really complicated. Like, it's really, really complicated. I don't think people give it enough credit, because it's not easy to like bend reality like that and keep the shot being able to be rendered and still have enough resolution on the textures to still be able to work it out. Like, it's really tricky. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if we jump from a daylight scene that has all this Mandelbrotting and deformation and tessellation, to what's still in the climactic section of the film, which is when they get to Hong Kong, and basically the character Wong has died. So Doctor Strange chooses to reverse time. That's also a pretty crazy sequence, isn't it, Hugo? Because effectively, the dark dimension has been destroying buildings and Hong Kong and whatnot, and it needs to be shown in reverse. I mean, it's not like they just shot it, simulated it, and clicked reverse in Houdini, did they, Hugo? There's a lot more going on.
Well, the funny thing about this is that we are so used to having a big climatic destruction on the end of the films, isn't it? And this is the opposite. It's a reconstruction scene at the end. So it's exactly the opposite as the typical Marvel fight at the end. Man, I don't even know where to begin. This thing is just like so complicated that you need to have a PhD to try to figure it out. It is so freaky complicated. Oh my God, because when you start, here's the problem. The biggest issue with all of this, when you have CG, and then you have the plates, and then you have the particles, and then you have the simulation. So all of them coming from most likely different softwares and different applications, all of them having different algorithms of playback. When you start bending time and reversing time, first you need to like start interpolating, because you can't just have, when you do a simulation, you do the simulation for a specific amount of frames. And usually you tend to do the simulation with more frames so that you can have more data for the noise and for the motion blur and for everything else. The problem here is that you are reversing. So that means you don't have enough frames. You need to like interpolate, basically generate interframes, basically subframe data when you are reversing. And then the problem is that all the softwares would have a different methodology of doing this. The first problem is the plate itself. You're shooting this on a really beautiful set. Like they've actually built the set. It's on Long Cross Studios, and the whole building is like a street level street. It's really large, really, really big. You'll see on the breakdowns when I'm showing it here. And then, of course, the whole top is CG. Now, the first problem is the motion control shoot. Like, you have to film it in motion control, and because you need to film it normal with people walking in one direction, and then you need to film the same camera move reverse so that you can then play it back reversed so that you see the same camera move going, but then some people reversing. Because on one shot, you might have, like, Doctor Strange walking normally, but then everyone else reversed. So that means you need to shoot two plates. You need to shoot one plate going forward with Doctor Strange, then you go back, and then you put the extras, you remove Doctor Strange, and then you shoot the same camera move reversed with people walking the other way around, and then you play them back together. This alone is I'm sorry, pardon my French. Sorry, Soretti. It's a mindfuck. This already is a mindfuck. This entire thing. I've done I've done this before. I've worked many times on motion control at Stellar Studios, and also I did a time-bending short film called Learn in Slow Motion, which was really complicated, and that was just one guy, one guy. It was already complicated. We were like on the set, like calculating how many seconds. Oh my God, like it's so complicated. So going back to it, sorry. So you then, the problem then when you do the two motion control sets, you need to mark the floor where Benedict Cumberbatch, which I never say his name correctly, where he walks, because then you can't have people walking through him. So you need to mark, and then you need to mark where everyone is walking so that they also don't go through the CG, and that they don't go through the cars, and they don't go through Wong and everyone else. This is really difficult, and that's just the plate. Okay, so that's just the plate. And then we need to do the CG. And then the CG, all coming from different softwares, every software has a different interpolation of frame subdata. And so that means, for example, on some times, for the volumes, for example, for the volumes and smoke and debris, they actually had to do bidirectional versions of the CG. Because if they just did one direction, just reversing, the problem was that when they go forward and then they stop and then they go back, they would start having noise and problems with motion blur and a lot of other data. So this is so complicated, so complicated.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that there's a technical discussion that can be had about this, but also an aesthetic one. I talked to Richard Bluff from ILM about this film back then for VFX blog, and Richard's actually gone on to, huge things with virtual production and Mandalorian at ILM, and he had previously done a lot of environment supervision. And what he talked about was the rhythm of the debris that was being reversed, or being simulated in reverse. And I think they would watch dailies and sort of, that doesn't look right. It doesn't feel like the right rhythm. And that's the mindfuck, Hugo, because you're like, but what are we talking about here? The rhythm of reversing. But, this is what visual effects people do in dailies and discussions. So I was kind of fascinated by that response. The other thing he said was about sound design and sound effects, and that they knew while doing, the simulations and working the shots up, that sound effects would perform so much more of the role here by giving the clue that things were going backwards, forwards. And of course we know how big a deal sound design and sound effects are. But here in particular, I thought that was interesting that a visual effects person had mentioned that. So I just wanted to recall that.
It does, especially for this, because all those swoops and all those sounds really help for you to believe that it's something going on. And so that you can get away with certain parts and maybe certain things that may not go exactly according to plan. Because when you're dealing with simulations, it's always a bit tricky. Like you set up the computer to do the simulation, you walk away for a couple of hours or maybe a day, and then you come back, and then maybe it's correct, maybe it's not. And this entire thing, of course, with the simulations and the subframe data interpolation was really complicated for the slow motions. But then you also, on top of that, you have the rigging, because you need to have every building, every part of debris, all the car, everything has to be rigged for destruction. And so this is really complicated because they actually had to do a procedural method for this because there was so many. In the end, they ended up doing like a library of pre-rigged assets they could just put in, like air cons and furniture and concrete chunks or cars, so that they knew that they could just like slide it. I'm not making it so simple, but because the work has been done before on the rig, they could just have sliders to destroy it or build it back together, or destroy it or build it back together. So all of this had to be pre-made, pre-rigged, and pre-organized before they could put in. Now, I think this shot, I've watched it so many times, and I always find something new on it. Because there are so many things going on.
Food in the bowls or something like that.
It's so funny. Just yesterday, I noticed the little cracks of the stone when that guy gets like merged into the wall. I just noticed, oh wow, they've actually put in the little breaks of this little squares that, when you have these walls on the bathrooms, you have these little tiles and they have like little cracks, and my God, this is just insane. And that was like probably weeks of work, and it's just like a little frame on that film.
Or that's like the aquarium, that's like a whole water sim, glass sim, something else. There's something else in there. I mean, I can't even fathom some of this stuff.
I don't think
sometimes.
people really realize how much work is on this shot, that entire sequence, and again, not just the fact that it's so difficult to play. Obviously, they filmed a lot of it, but obviously on a lot of it, they had to replace with rotomation, digital humans. They had to change a lot of that, of course, to try to kind of like make it. But there is one particular shot that I love, like one particular effect that I love, which is really creative, which is the slicing of the
Right,
characters.
because the characters are going in out of time. There's a time band thing on them, isn't there? Yeah.
I love that. I really love that. And this entire thing is really cool. So on this film, they've basically made photogrammetry of everyone, as they usually do on these films. And so what they have to do is they have to convert them into point clouds, and then they have to slice them, those point clouds, and then use the slices and being driven by maps to drive forwards or backwards. So then when you have the footage, basically you're projecting the footage that you've shot together with the full CG version of the digital person. And then you have these like bands of maps that are cutouts from the cloud, from the point cloud. It's really beautiful effect, really beautiful. We've seen it, you've mentioned, on the cars, on the New York scene, but now we see it on people, and they're like trying to get free and trying to get out of it, and it's really, really pretty, and really, really well made. I like that. I really like that effect. Too. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't feel like there's much more we can say about those two sequences, Hugo, except that they're fantastic. I'm only slightly apologetic about not mentioning the next sequence, which is, when he says to, this is where we always pronounce it incorrectly, don't we?
Oh, Hugo? My God, here we go again.
Dumamu, I've come to bargain. Look, we keep mentioning it, and it's a beautiful sequence from Luma, but we're trying to focus on individual sequences here. So all I want to say is amazing work from Luma. We already kind of mentioned it in a previous episode. But I just think this is a very unusual ending to the film in terms of those two climatic sequences plus the Dormammu one.
The Dormammu.
Dormammu, sorry. Oh my gosh.
Dormammu.
I've come to bargain. And that's why Scott Derrickson's film, I think, was so well remembered, because it was a bit unusual, right, in the whole Marvel universe. I just wanted to really basically say it wrapped it up so well. It actually set up the next film really well too, even though Scott Derrickson obviously didn't direct the sequel. He was sort of involved, for a while there. Basically, I think Doctor Strange is on the top of one of the, it's in the top number of my list of the MCU films, Hugo. What about you?
Yeah, it is. It's one of my favorites, and it's also an audience favorite as well. And it has like 96 on Rotten Tomatoes. It's. I think it is an amazing combination. We talked about this on the first episode that we talked. An amazing combination of amazing actors, Oscar-winning and Oscar-nominated actors, all making this super weird film. Like, it is a super weird film.
Weird. Yeah.
Just a weird, bizarre film that has these really off-the-wall sequences, completely different from everything else we've seen on MCU. And what I love the most about this film is that this film still is on a phase where Marvel did these films and they were living separately. Like, you don't need to watch any other show or any other film. You just need to watch this film and you fully understand what's going on. You don't need to watch... you need to watch these 10 shows on Disney Plus, or you need to watch these 5 films first to understand it. There's nothing like that. It's a complete origin story like Iron Man, and you just can watch it. And I think that's why it has such a big value on Rotten Tomatoes and the audience loves it so much. And I'll be honest, no disrespect, but I don't like the fact that sometimes on these films I have to have watched 10 things before. And I don't like that, because it's kind of forcing me to... you need to. It's like a TV show. I'm not here to watch it as a TV show. Like, have you watched season 1 and 2? No, I thought I came here to watch one movie. And so I kind of like, I understand what they're trying to do, but I think they need to tone it down. I don't mind having little moments that can connect, but I don't like the fact that you have to watch the entire season of WandaVision to fully understand Doctor Strange 2. As much as it's cool to have Wanda there, I thought it was a sequel of Doctor Strange. I know we're not going to talk about Doctor Strange 2 today, but you know what I mean?
We really go down multi-dimensions here, Hugo.
Yes, exactly. But I you know what I mean. This film is really focused, and I love that. And the visual effects are focused, the acting is focused, the film itself is focused, and And yeah, you're right. Luma's sequence at the end is mind blowing. We didn't. There's so many things as well we haven't talked. We haven't even talked about the skin particle thing when they die. You know, it's also amazing as well. There's so many other things to talk about.
Have we talked enough though in these 3 episodes about the cloak of levitation, Hugo?
Oh man,
the
that
freaking
cloak again.
Have we talked about it?
Oh man, that cloak again. Here we go again.
All right. All right. That's it. Thank you everyone for listening to our 3 episodes on Doctor Strange. We've really enjoyed it. And Hugo, always such a pleasure talking about it too.
It is. Thank you so much for everyone for watching.
Awesome. Bye everyone. Bye.
Bye.